This week, we will focus on combating procrastination tendencies, as well as how self-worth theory explains why we avoid failure. We'll start by revisiting the differences between procrastination and time management. Before we jump into a discussion on procrastination, let's remember that procrastination and time management are not one and the same. Although both can impact the use of time, the root causes of each are very different. Time management is an issue of skill, the skill of understanding how to prioritize and organize time and tasks to achieve goals. Students who are lacking time management skills are lacking knowledge in how to prioritize or manage their tasks. Procrastination, on the other hand, is an issue of will and is related specifically to starting tasks, meaning procrastination is a motivation issue because it impacts our active choice of behavior. A learner who is procrastinating may understand how to best prioritize tasks and manage their time, but may not feel like starting the tasks they have planned. If they are not able to effectively manage their affect, they will keep putting off the tasks. Again, it is important to note that the key difference between time management and procrastination is that time management is an issue of skill, while procrastination is an issue of will. In this unit, we will focus on procrastination. Let's revisit Covington and Roberts' quadrupolar model of need for achievement. A student's ability is repeatedly tested in school, and over a period of time, two different dispositions are developed: a motive to approach success and a motive to avoid failure. These motives function throughout all areas of our life. Essentially, some people are hypothesized to undertake things in order to be successful, and others primarily to avoid being a failure. The outcome may sometimes be almost the same, but the underlying motivational context and the whole personal experience of pursuing one of the goals is very different. While one student approaches a task from the excitement of potential success, the other is doing his best to avoid the inevitable failure. However, these two are not totally independent from each other. They do interact. That is, sometimes people are motivated by both a desire for success as well as a desire to avoid failure, with each motive being either high or low. These interactions form the table presented in this slide. We can use this table to categorize four different types of students: the success-oriented students, the overstrivers, the failure avoiders, and the failure acceptors. Reflecting on what we learned about these four types of students from previous units, where do you think procrastination lies? In order to find the answer, you have to ask yourself, what is the nature of procrastination at its core? Procrastination is essentially an unresolved or only partially resolved approach avoidance conflict. We want or need to do or approach something, but for some reason we avoid it. So procrastination shows up as avoidance behavior. With that in mind, where would you place it in this model? If you guessed failure avoidance, you are almost 100% correct. While we would place procrastination in the failure avoider category because the motive to avoid failure is very high and the motive to approach success is very low, we also have to place part of it in the overstriver category. Thinking about what you read in the Sapadin book, How to Beat Procrastination in the Digital Age, we know that perfectionism can also be a form of procrastination. While perfectionists would most likely be placed in the overstriver category, we have to acknowledge that a perfectionist's tendency to overwork due to the high expectations they place on themselves is in itself a form of procrastination. Now we know that procrastination results from a high motive to avoid failure. So why is failure so scary? Why do we avoid it? What's the big deal if we fail the test, lose the debate, or don't get an A on the paper? Why does it matter? What will be affected? According to Covington, students who have a high motivation to avoid failure, like failure avoiders and overstrivers, often do so because failure would affect their sense of self-worth. Covington states that the motive for self-worth is the universal desire for self-acceptance. This includes a desire to establish and maintain a positive self-image and to feel successful. As humans, we all want to feel good about ourselves. Yet the high value our society places on success makes failure result in feelings of unworthiness, hopelessness, and self-rejection. To avoid these negative emotions, students who have a high need to avoid failure use procrastination to protect their self-worth. How so? Let's look at a formula that explains two things. One, how academic performance impacts our self-worth, and two, how we use procrastination to protect our self-worth. Self-worth equals ability equals performance. What does this mean? An easier way to understand it is to read it in the reverse. Performance is a direct reflection of our ability, and our ability determines our self-worth. Meaning, if we perform at a high level, such as acing the test, winning the debate, or getting an A on the paper, it is assumed to be a direct reflection of our high ability. And as students, when we believe we have a high academic ability, it results in high self-worth. This sounds great, right? But what does it mean if we don't perform at a high level? What if we fail the test? Our failure is believed to be a direct reflection of our low ability, and the belief that we have a low ability results in a low self-worth. So we said students use procrastination to protect them from having a lowered self-worth. But what does this look like? Procrastination breaks down the relationship between performance and ability. But how? When we procrastinate, self-worth is still based on ability, but ability is no longer equal to one's performance. Meaning, if a student failed a test but only studied the night before or the morning of, it is not a direct reflection of their ability. In this way, the student can rationalize, I would have gotten a better grade on the test if I studied more. So it's not that I couldn't get an A, but I just waited till the last minute to study. This conclusion breaks the relationship between the academic performance and the student's ability, in turn protecting their self-worth. Ironically, in an effort to avoid failure, the student failed. Self-worth theory contends that the protection of a sense of ability is the student's highest priority, higher sometimes even than good grades. Stemming from that, students may actually handicap themselves by not studying in order to have an excuse for failing that does not reflect poorly on their ability. Instead, it will reflect on their lack of effort, which is a more acceptable reason to fail than failing because one lacks ability. In our Western society, ability has a much higher value than effort. Think about it. Which would you rather hear if you got an A on a major exam? Good job, you are so smart. Or, good job, you worked so hard. In our society, seeing ability as the reason for success increases self-worth more than seeing effort and hard work as the reason for success. There is also a powerful difference in emotional reactions between failing for effort versus failing for a lack of ability. The difference also motivates students to protect their self-worth. The emotion we experience if we fail for controllable reasons, such as staying out too late the night before a test, is guilt, while the emotion we experience if we fail for uncontrollable reasons, such as failing a test even though we studied for a whole week, is shame. The beliefs associated with guilt are very different than the beliefs associated with shame. When we experience guilt, we say to ourselves, I made a mistake. This reflects the association we have between guilt and a lack of effort. But with shame, we say to ourselves, I am a mistake. This is the self-rejection we experience when we believe we lack ability. Although guilt is not a warm and fuzzy feeling, we would much rather feel guilty than the worthlessness of shame. In this way, it is not the failure that we are avoiding, but the shame associated with it. And in order to avoid shame at all costs, students will procrastinate so they fail the task for a lack of effort. Let's step away from procrastination for a few slides and explore what other strategies we employ to protect our self-worth. We can break these strategies into two groups: those that guarantee success and those that guarantee failure. Failure for reasons other than ability, of course. We will first explore how some students avoid failure by succeeding. Keep in mind that when we engage in these strategies, our motivation is really not to succeed, but to avoid failure, which is a very different motivation foundation. Some students are closet achievers, or those who will complain about not having enough time to study, but who in reality secretly spent the weekend in an isolated part of the library studying for hours. There are also the overstrivers, who, as you may recall, reflect an intense desire to both succeed and to avoid failure. They rarely put off starting tasks. In fact, they are usually among the first to begin. However, they are also among the last to stop, which, as Sapadin wrote, is an unrecognized form of procrastination. Instead of having trouble starting a task, many overstrivers will not stop working. The anxiety produced by a high need to avoid failure pushes them to overwork and guarantee their success. Next, some students resort to engage in academic cheating in order to avoid failure by guaranteeing success. By trading in on their integrity, cheaters may gain some measure of relief from the prospect of failing, but the respite is short-lived, since this postponement creates new, greater fears of being unable to repeat one's successes and of being caught. Another strategy students use to guarantee success is low goal setting. This is when students set their academic goals so low that there is little to no chance of failing. A related strategy to low goal setting is defensive pessimism. We'll take a closer look at defensive pessimism on the next slide, but before we leave this one, it is important to note that although these strategies may guarantee success, the term success here refers to a high grade or at least an acceptable one. It, however, does not imply a mastery of learning. This is because the real issue with these strategies is that many students who are using these strategies are more motivated to avoid failure than to learn. Students who engage in defensive pessimism lower their expectations to help prepare themselves for the worst, regardless of how well they have done in the past. For example, even though a student may have obtained high grades in a statistics class before, she feels that she will merely get a C this time around. Many of the best students are defensive pessimists. They usually spend great amounts of time preparing for and completing tasks. Defensive pessimists often are very studious. This is usually coupled with high anxiety since they mentally play through all of the bad things that might happen. Though it sounds as if it might be depressing, defensive pessimism actually helps anxious people focus away from their emotions so that they can plan and act effectively. They protect their self-worth by preparing themselves for failure and its implications on their self-worth. In essence, if they should fail, they are prepared to deal with it. It's as if they are disputing their irrational beliefs before the activating event has even occurred. In fact, experimental research shows that if defensive pessimists try to raise their expectations or avoid playing through the worst-case analysis, their anxiety increases and their performance suffers. This seems effective, so what's the problem? The problem is that defensive pessimism comes with a price tag. Over time, defensive pessimists may burn out from the high levels of anxiety. They may also limit their own potential by not setting goals that are commensurate with their level of ability. For example, a student may choose an easier major or choose a less challenging task. As an adult in the prime of their career, a defensive pessimist may go for the director of accounting position instead of the CFO position. So how do students protect their self-worth by guaranteeing failure? As we take a look at these self-worth protective strategies, note that students who engage in them are guaranteeing failure for reasons other than a lack of ability. One way students protect their self-worth is to create unattainable goals, or goals that are so high that failure is virtually assured. For instance, aspiring to have a straight A average while carrying a double major in college and two part-time jobs. This irrational behavior makes perfectly logical sense when viewed from a self-worth perspective. Failure at an exceedingly difficult task reveals little about one's ability, since success is beyond all but the most capable or energetic of students. Other students guarantee failure by underachieving. Chronic underachievers avoid any test of their ability by refusing to work, thereby maintaining an inflated opinion of themselves. In order to justify this deceptive cover, underachievers often make a virtue of not trying. They may even convince themselves that failure is a mark of nonconformity and evidence of their individuality. This belief originates more out of a fear of inadequacy than out of any sign of moral conviction. The academic wooden leg, or anxiety, is another way students guarantee failure. Here, the individual admits publicly to a minor persona weakness or handicap in order to avoid disclosing a far greater imagined weakness. By arguing that their poor performance is the result of test-taking anxiety, individuals reason that it is better to appear anxious than incompetent, and in the process they can convert ridicule and scorn instantly into sympathetic, solicitous concern. This is not to say that students do not experience test anxiety, but those who are motivated to protect their self-worth by guaranteeing failure may either use this as an excuse or may simply avoid managing the anxiety they do have in order to continue to use it to protect their self-worth. Another common way students protect their self-worth is through self-handicapping. I'm sure you've heard stories of students partying too much or making themselves sick before exams, and then blaming the failure on those reasons. Sometimes self-handicappers simply do not study, but claim that something happened, like a family emergency, that prevented them from studying. The key to understanding why students self-handicap is that they need to shift the reason for failure away from a lack of ability. A specific method of self-handicapping is procrastination. By studying only at the last minute, procrastinators can hardly be blamed for failure. They simply had too much to do and not enough time. Moreover, if these individuals are successful, a reputation for brilliance will be assured because they will have succeeded with so little effort. Thus, in one sense at least, procrastinators have little to lose and much to gain. With that being said, let's take a closer look at procrastination. So, are you a procrastinator? Research shows that 70 to 90% of Western college students engage in procrastination, with 20% having a chronic issue. Here are some common behaviors and beliefs that procrastinators struggle with. Procrastinators often overestimate the time that they have left to perform tasks. They also underestimate the time it takes to complete the tasks. The underestimation of the amount of time a task will take, coupled with the belief that they have plenty of time to complete the task, is a recipe for disaster. Next, procrastinators often overestimate how motivated they will feel the next day, the next week, the next month, etc. They tend to feel like tomorrow will hold unlimited ideas, focus, and motivation. Procrastinators also think that succeeding at a task requires that they feel like doing it. On the contrary, the most successful students are able to motivate themselves to do the tasks they do not feel like or want to do. Lastly, procrastinators believe that working when not in the mood is suboptimal. But if we waited to start tasks until we felt like doing them, we would hardly ever get anything done. Although procrastinators usually have all the tendencies listed here, students have different reasons for engaging in procrastination. On the next several slides, we will take a look at the 6 different procrastination personality styles that help us to better understand what may be the cause of our need to avoid failure through procrastination. When it comes to completing tasks, the perfectionist tends to do all or nothing. If students are perfectionists, doing nothing can protect their illusionary ability, but doing all or overworking can push them to both procrastinate completing the task as well as ignoring or putting off the start of other tasks. Dreamers feel that they have little real achievement in life, so they compensate for it by having grandiose dreams. Of course, the bigger the dream, the less likely that one will accomplish it, but they can blame lack of success on the big nature of the dream. They also tend to believe in fate, absolving themselves of having to actually do something. A dreamer may say to themselves, "It just wasn't meant to be." The worrier suffers from constant worry of, "What if I will not be able to handle it?" The "it" can be a difficult class, a presentation, a new job, etc. There is a fear that change would reveal some inability they have. Worriers also like for others to make decisions, so if things fail, it doesn't affect their self-worth. The defier feels that someone telling them what to do is a threat to their self-worth. They may not feel special, so they use blatant defiance or passive-aggressive behavior to make themselves feel special. Crisis makers try to make themselves feel better by gaining the glory of succeeding at the last minute, or not looking very bad if they fail as a result of less than total effort. Crisis makers create crises to get noticed, since otherwise they have feelings of powerlessness. Lastly, the pleaser has a difficult time saying no. Pleasers tend to suffer from a low sense of self-worth, which compels them to take on more work than they can reasonably handle. Since they do not feel that they are enough by just being who they are, they feel the need to validate themselves by doing a lot, that is. Still, they can be plagued by feelings of unworthiness. So now that we have gone over the 6 different procrastinator personality styles, as well as some of the reasons students procrastinate, let's find out what we can do about it. We will now review research-based procrastination elimination strategies. First, because procrastination has a motivational root, setting SMART goals is one way to help avoid procrastination. Another good strategy is to practice time telling, or estimating the amount of time it takes to complete a task. Procrastinators often underestimate the amount of time to complete tasks, so cultivating a realistic understanding of how much time is needed to complete different tasks is helpful. For instance, you might find it takes you longer to read through certain types of material than others, such as an empirical article taking longer to read than a chapter in a book. Using prompts or reminders to help you get started on a task is also helpful. You may set an alarm 15 minutes before your regular study period to get mentally prepared to engage in learning. Rewarding yourself when you have met your goals can be a great way to regulate your behavior. The bits and pieces approach, or breaking larger assignments or tasks into smaller ones, can help you feel less overwhelmed. For example, if you set a goal of completing the title page, introduction, and reference page for a paper you have been anxious about starting, this may feel much less intimidating than just setting a goal to finish your paper. The 5-minute plan can also be helpful by tricking you, so to speak, into starting a task. Especially with procrastination, it is getting started that can be the hardest part, whether it's starting a new chapter in a book or staring at the cursor on a blank screen. If you tell yourself that you will just work on something for 5 minutes, you will likely go beyond working for those 5 minutes since you've gotten over the biggest hurdle of getting started. We can also shoot for 80% completion. Experiment with standards for success to test core beliefs and avoid catastrophizing. Instead of aiming for 100%, try for 80% or 90% to see that the world doesn't end when you're not perfect. Social support is also key to eliminating procrastination. Make friends with classmates who are self-regulated. Also, there is really nothing like having a publicly stated goal to help you get started, so that you keep your word and don't put off starting tasks. Another great way to reduce the fear of failure that fuels procrastination tendencies is to recognize that you are worthy as a person for who you are and not only for what you do. Don't let academic performance be the sole source of your self-worth. There are many other areas of one's life that can generate self-worth, such as real and truthful relationships with family and friends, giving of yourself, such as volunteering, dedication to your faith, expertise in a sport or the fine arts, or mastery of a valued hobby. Lastly, challenging procrastination beliefs is a great way to prevent yourself from avoiding tasks. As we've heard in previous units, becoming aware of and disputing irrational beliefs is an important part of changing the way we think about activating events, such as a difficult exam. And changing our thinking by disputing procrastination beliefs is imperative when we're trying to change our emotional and behavioral consequences. Let's take a look at an example on the next slide. When we're procrastinating, we often tell ourselves, "I work better under pressure." But this is really just a rationalization to avoid the negative feelings that are brought on by a job that is either boring or too difficult. And the real truth isn't, "I work better under pressure," but "I work only under pressure." So instead of telling ourselves to just do it, we should be saying, "Just get started." Finally, as you are learning this week, reflect on these questions. On what tasks do you procrastinate? What may be the real issue? How do you protect your self-worth? Are your goals both challenging and attainable? Which procrastination personality style do you mainly engage in? What does this imply about why you avoid failure? Lastly, what procrastination elimination strategies could you implement to combat procrastination tendencies?